Keith Smith, Yahoo Sports, the Bubble Master, joins us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline to talk more about the NBA bubbles. We are one day away from real game action. We got to get into that, the Sixers, and more with Keith now on 97.3 ESPN. Keith, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, guys. How are you?
We're doing pretty good. So I think the biggest thing to take away for us is, we're one day away from basketball action. There's a few hiccups along the way, but overall it seems like the NBA plan, all of its restrictions, all of its setups, everything that's working, it looks like we are actually going to have a resumption of a basketball season.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get it there, and things are looking more and more positive by the week that we'll get all the way through this thing. They are on to another week with no positive tests inside the bubble. They're clearly taking very strict action when the players violate any of the protocols that were set forth, and they're moving this thing forward. So I feel very confident now that not only we're clearly going to start, but now I feel very confident that we're also going to finish.
Now, you mentioned about finishing. I think the biggest thing that's standing out is a lot of the other sports now are looking at the NBA. For example, baseball, the NFL, and they're saying, well, what are we learning from what the NBA is doing? I think part of it is the fact that one of the problems we're seeing in baseball that the NBA was way ahead of, the NBA is testing these guys every day, and it's to the point where if a guy doesn't take his test, they tell him to stay in his hotel room. So I think that's where the other sports are learning what has to be done, is that if you don't do this daily testing, there's no certainty of anything.
Yeah, that's it. If you don't do the daily testing, and then if the players aren't responsible and the staff aren't responsible for, kind of staying away from people unless they really need to, go out to the store or something like that, you're going to have issues. And we're seeing that in Major League Baseball. We're seeing that in the NFL so far with a lot of positive tests as guys are reporting to camps. But the NFL, or the NBA rather, daily testing, the fact that everyone is isolated in Florida, that seems to be the way to go if you want to, be able to take this thing off with relatively few issues.
Let's flip to the Sixers here. And Joel Embiid has played about 12 to 15 minutes in their first exhibition game, and he has not been seen on the floor since. And I know it's just exhibition game, so it's not something so serious, but with a new starting five that has barely played any time together at all when it comes to the regular season, should this be a little concerning from a team chemistry standpoint?
Yeah, you should be concerned from that standpoint. You should just be concerned. Here's yet another thing that's keeping Joel Embiid off the floor. If it was any other player, you'd say, an abundance of caution, no problem. But with Joel Embiid, we know small things have turned into big things, and that's always seems to be kind of an issue with him. And even that time he did play, he didn't look all that great out there. He didn't look like he was moving real well. It just, looked like he was going to be a guy who needed that time to get himself ready. So now you've missed out on not only him getting ready, but as you said, that lineup time. You were probably hoping to have about 20 minutes each of these three scrimmage games to get that group together, see how it worked together, let Brett Brown figure out some of his rotations, figure out how he was going to use his backups, and now you're kind of going into the start of the season here blind.
Should we be concerned also about Joel Embiid's mentality? Because it's been suggested by a lot of people. We had one guest earlier this week who said it bothers them that Joel Embiid, might rather be in his hotel room playing FIFA video games than actually playing basketball. I heard Zach Lowe said that he and others were not voting for Joel Embiid for the NBA All-NBA team, not even the third team, because of the fact that in some ways he kind of, lollygagged his way through the season. So should there be a concern with Joel Embiid's mindset going into this NBA restart?
Yeah, I think that is a little bit of a concern. Now, one of the things is we're hearing, a lot with Joel Embiid is there's this thought process out there of this guy only has so X amount of games in him each year, and how is he going to make that work? And then when you're looking at that, as you get into these long regular seasons, he kind of seemed like he took road games off a little bit. He was really awful on the road. He was very much a jump shooter only, and didn't really come with the same effort on both ends of the floor, and that's troubling. So it looked like that's how it was. Well, I got to play 70 plus games, so I'm just going going to kind of take half of them off and just kind of do my thing here. So now what you're looking at with Joel Embiid is you're getting a lot of people who had given him the benefit of the doubt for a long time are now starting to criticize a little and say, hey, if this guy, can't get it done, he's got all the talent in the world, but now we're in multiple years of this kind of just, I don't know, is he going to be there when you need him? That's a worry, and that's the worry with the restart of the season is can Philadelphia be the team everybody thought and hoped they would be without him able to be a part of it?
I would argue that it wasn't just Joel Embiid with those certain off days and certain off games. That's been the knock on this Sixers team all the time. It's like at home, hey, they're great, but when they go on the road, they have these off games where they can't have any sort of flow going in their offense and they can't make their shots. So, I could argue that that's almost the entire team at points.
Yeah, it's the entire team. He's just the most drastic by far from the home road splits. He only shoots 43% on the road, and that's the guy who's a 7-foot walking bucket at home. You just give him the ball and he does his thing. So that's the challenge is, and that was one of the things that was brought up is we're going to find out were they really great at home or were they really bad on the road, or was it just were they just bad not at home? Because there is a difference, on the road in front of a hostile crowd. Is that something that affected them, or was it just that they just weren't good when they weren't playing at home? We're going to find that out in this neutral site environment.
Keith Smith joining us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure you follow on Twitter for all your NBA news at Keith Smith NBA. Now, you mentioned about the overall play of the team. Who's really benefited to me of Joel Embiid deciding, or the team deciding, whoever decided, him not playing? Al Horford has looked really good these last two games. So could this be an omen of Al Horford maybe playing his way into more minutes when the teams get on the court?
The more minutes part's going to be tough because if Embiid is going to play 35 minutes a night, they really seem committed to not playing them together very much. So that doesn't leave a lot of time for Horford. He kind of really, truly becomes Embiid's backup. I think if you're Brett Brown, you got to kind of look at this as, hey, I'm going to, play the hot hand. If Horford is going well, then I'll sit Embiid and not play him, and I'll play Horford. Maybe you got to try to force, 5 minutes a half of the two of them together just to see, what does it look like. But Al Horford, he played well in the scrimmages. He had played better down the stretch of the season before the hiatus, as he was really playing the 5. He's just not a guy you can play at the 4 anymore. I think that's really clear now is he has to be at the 5. He needs to be, somebody who can do that. And at the 5, he's a tough guard because he can do a lot of things out at the perimeter as a shooter, as a passer, as a ball handler, screener, and those kind of things. And then his defensive ability, really holds up well at the 5. He just doesn't move the way he used to be able to play the 4.
I kind of have a two-parter here for you. What have you liked about Ben Simmons so far playing off the ball, and what have you disliked?
I like that he has been a willing shooter. I think that's, that's the obvious one, but that is important. I always say there's a very big difference between a bad shooter and a non-shooter. When Philadelphia had Ben Simmons and TJ McConnell, whenever they played them together, they had two non-shooters, and that makes it very easy on a defense. When a guy is not going to shoot the ball from, let's say, deeper than 15 feet, you just don't have to guard him. The team I cover, Boston, Marcus Smart has been, for most of his career, a bad shooter, but teams still had to guard him because you never knew when that night was coming where he's going to go, 6 out of 8 from deep because he was still willing to shoot it. So I like that he's been willing. What I don't like is there's just too many possessions where he's just kind of hanging out. And that, makes it tough. He's going to have to make some of those shots for teams to really, want to pay attention to him off the ball. I'd like to see him cut a little bit more. He just kind of starts floating around the perimeter, and you can see it's almost his natural instinct of go get the ball and make something happen, with the ball in his hands. That starts to take over. So that's something they're going to have to figure out. I think these eight games are going to be really, really important for them because in 8 games you can get a really good sense of, okay, this is how we want you to play, and this is what we believe is going to work best moving forward.
Keith, you mentioned about how sometimes he's just standing there not knowing what to do with himself. How much of that also is his lack of experience playing off the ball? Because, a lot of people talk about, there's a history of guys in the NBA who were primary ball handlers playing off the ball, but I would argue that of all the times it's happened, Ben Simmons is probably the least experienced of all of those players historically.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely, I think, probably the single biggest part of it. This is all brand new to him. I can't imagine there's been any point in his life where, up until now, that he wasn't the primary ball handler with the ball in his hands, 90% of the time initiating the offense. Now that they have really committed to, hey, we're going to let Shake Milton do some stuff. We're going to let Josh Richardson do some things. Boy, they even ran some Tobias Harris, Al Horford, 4-5 pick and rolls, which I really kind of liked. Or I guess, 3-5 if you're considering Harris to be the power forward. But I really like those actions that they ran, and I thought, they're making a concerted effort to, I think, in not in a bad way, but run him off the ball, meaning Ben Simmons, to say, hey, we're gonna force this a little to make sure other guys do this and try to get him adjusted. But yeah, it's really tough for these guys. If you almost look at James Harden, one of the criticisms he gets all the time is when he's off the ball, he just kind of hangs out. You see, he puts his hands on his knees and looks like he's really kind of taking those possessions to breathe. And that hasn't been a problem the last couple of years with Chris Paul and now with Russell Westbrook because they've got somebody else. But that's almost what it's like with Simmons is it's like he doesn't really know what to do because he's just a guy who's so used to having the ball in his hands so much.
Who do you think can have a bigger impact off the bench, Furkan or Matisse Thybulle?
That's a good question. I think Korkmaz is really going to help open up the floor with his shooting. I want to say Thibault will have an impact because of his defense, but they've already got other really good defenders. It's hard to think their defense is going to take too much of a leap forward. And Matisse Thybulle, as much as I love his potential, I just don't know that he's a guy you can trust to play 25 minutes in a playoff game right now because I don't think he's going to make enough shots. I think that starts to become a pretty big issue. But I do think Korkmaz, if he can just make shots, that's huge for them because then what you can do, you think back to J.J. Redick. Now, he's not J.J. Redick, but he can be, similar to Redick in role where you can run him through that maze of screens, really bend the defense towards that player, and then that opens up other stuff where you use him as a decoy or you start causing switches or all sorts of other scramble type things out of the defense, and then it may nothing happen with Korkmaz, but just his presence opened that up, and I think that's going to be big. So I think you're going to see Brett Brown, not going to see because he's already doing it in the scrimmages, you're going to see more and more of him go back to some of the J.J. Redick playbook where that opens things up, not only just for Korkmaz as a shooter, but for other guys as well.
Keith, I know we'll be talking about a lot of Sixers over the next few weeks, so I feel like this Thybulle, Korkmaz, who should or shouldn't play isn't going to go away. So I wanted to ask you, because you're a guy who's been really tuned in to this bubble situation, about there's news report of what Michelle Roberts said, the head of the NBA Players Association, about the possibility of them doing the bubble again for next season. And it seems like this started when Chris Paul was asked, I think it was a week and a half ago, about the same question, and he didn't confirm or deny anything. And now Michelle Roberts has already let on that it's something that possibly is in discussion. So what could a potential bubble for an entirely full season next year even look like for the NBA?
Yeah, let's start with, I think everybody is saying Adam Silver, Michelle Roberts, they are qualified with, we hope to have fans in the stands at some point. But I think it's becoming increasingly clear here as we are at the end of July that it just doesn't seem likely that's going to be, in December when this next season is going to tip off. So I think what they are looking at is how do we get this season started and moving? The challenge is asking the players and the staff and all the people involved to do a bubble for the entirety of the season. That's just too much. You're talking 6-7 months. Be away from family and friends, or even if family come. But kids have things like school. Let's not knock down the importance of that. They have lives that are outside of that. That's just becomes an ask that just is really an unfair thing. Everybody was kind of willing to do this because it was, all right, hey, we get it. There's a point to finish out this season. But if they end up doing something like pod cities, which they've kind of talked about, or bubble cities where, maybe there's 3 or 4 around the country, one in kind of the Northwest, one in the Southwest, one in the, Southeast and Northeast, and that's kind of how you group the teams up and those kind of things. That may be something that works. And you kind of bring everybody in for a couple weeks, play a bunch of games over those 2-week period, then everybody goes away for, a week or so, or maybe you bring them in for a month at a time and then they go, they take a week or two off. That may be the way to go, because I think we're seeing right now the way the Major League Baseball season is working, there's just a lot of issues if you're planning on having teams fly all around the country to play each other. That just seems fraught with peril.
It's a conversation we're going to keep having, because the way the world is going, nobody knows what's September, October, November, December even going to look like. But I'm sure Keith Smith will be all over it. Follow him on Twitter at Keith Smith NBA for all your NBA coverage. He joins us on the Sports Bash every Wednesday here in the 5 o'clock hour. Keith, appreciate the time and enjoy the basketball.
Absolutely. Next talk. Good games to break down. Wait.
Absolutely. Keith Smith on the Boardwalk on the hotline here on 97.3 ESPN.